Ezekiel has had a vision of the resplendent, radiant glory of God. And that experience of the living God has knocked Ezekiel down to his knees, face to the dirt in awe and healthy fear. And that's where we pick up the story. Ezekiel is hunkered down before the majesty of God, and God says, "Zeke, get yourself up." And apparently Zeke did not get up fast enough, because the text says a spirit entered him and set him on his feet. Then God gives Ezekiel a job, and not just any job, but the job of bearing, of speaking God's own words, which sounds like a pretty good gig. But that call to be the bearer of God's words is not without its difficult points. Indeed, it is a revolve of good news and bad news. God says to Ezekiel, "I have good news and I've got bad news. The good news is that I am sending you with my words. The bad news is that the people to whom I am sending you, the ones to whom you are to say those words that I will give you, are a notoriously uppity, stubborn people who probably will not listen." That's the bad news part. But here's the good news again. That isn't your problem. Your job is not to make them listen. Your job is to tell them, and to tell them faithfully, what I said. Don't be put off when they roll their eyes at what you have to say. Just tell them the message I have sent, and let them make no mistake that it is indeed not your message, but my message. And then God goes on, and here's what I want you to tell them. And here's that good news, bad news thing again. The words that God gives Ezekiel to tell those stiff-necked, obstinate, mulish people are not pretty words. What God hands Ezekiel is not a Hallmark greeting card. The words that God gives to Ezekiel are words of lamentation and mourning and woe, making him the bringer of bad news, which is not a good way to become popular. It does not sound like something one might aspire to as a lifelong vocation. But here's the thing, you see, we're still in that good news, bad news revolve. When Ezekiel is faithful to God's calling, when Ezekiel takes the words that God has given to him to say, when Ezekiel eats those words, when he takes them into himself, something happens. And those acrid, bitter words become as sweet as honey. That transformation happens because even though God sends the prophets with words of lamentation and judgment, of accusation and rebuke, those words are never the end of what God has to say. There is always more to God's sentence. Those disturbing, unpleasant words are only preamble. The words that God gives through chosen messengers always end in words of grace and good news, which for us who are called to be messengers is good news indeed. So why don't we just start with the good news? Because sometimes the people to whom the good news is proclaimed don't know they need it. If those people in captivity, those to whom God sends Ezekiel, if those people had been on the right track, if instead of being a stubborn and impudent people, if they had been a gentle and compassionate, considerate people, a faithful people, God would not have needed to send them a word. The mission on which God sends Ezekiel is not one of judicial sentence or condemnation, but one of reclamation, amendment, restoration. But to get to that place of restoration, the people need to know that they're not there. So before the good news of grace, there must be words of bad news. I think that those who are called to preach do well to keep a picture of Ezekiel on their desk or wherever it is that they work on crafting their sermon. He has been there before us. We are He. We experience God, and then God, for reasons known only to the divine mind, taps us on the shoulder and says, I got a job for you to do. I want you, yes, you, to take my words to a people who need to hear them. Sometimes the words I will give to you will be hard and unpleasant. They may be words the people to whom I am sending you do not want to hear. Be prepared for them not to listen and, quite frankly, to blame you for the message. That is why it is important to be clear that those words are not yours, but mine. You hear that? Perhaps you will be proclaiming God's words, the words God has given you, proclaiming them with conviction and passion, and you will look out at the beloved people whom God has given into your loving pastoral charge, and they will be looking at you like they smell something bad. But that's actually a good thing, because it means that they're actually listening to what you're saying. Not that they will like it, but them liking it isn't your job. You are the interpreter, a translator of God's words, shaping and speaking God's words into the context into which you are sent. And as long as the words and the message are what God wants you to say and not what you want to say, you are being faithful to the task to which God has called you. And that, in the end, you being faithful to the task to which God has called you, is the obliging thing. The task of speaking God's words is not easy. If it were, then just anyone could do it, which is obviously not the case. Anyone who has actually done it will tell you that real preaching is hard. On our own, we could not do it. On our own, we do not do it. We need help. You know, Ezekiel's mama named him right. The name Ezekiel means, when you translate it, the name Ezekiel means God will strengthen. And so God does. God does not call us and then leave us on our own. God picks us up, sets us on our feet, and breathes into us, puts words into us, so that when those words come back out of our mouths, they are carried by the very breath of the Spirit, which ought to make us approach the task of preaching with some awe and reverence. Preachers, the words are never yours. Sure, they come through you. They are shaped by you to be attainable in your context, but the words are God's. The bad news is that those words are often bitter. It is for you to make them like honey, so that the last word you proclaim to God's people is always a sweet, graceful word of good news.